Friends, buckle up. I've got a story today that starts in quiet despair and ends in hard-won hope, the kind that makes your throat tighten. A rancher's practical choice of bride that felt dead wrong, until nature itself stepped in with a fury so merciless it stripped every pretense away, deep in the American West where blizzards don't just bury trains, they bury regrets. Out here the horizon swallows men whole, and fate has a habit of locking doors until people finally look each other in the eye. Everything changed the instant he stood in that shaking station house and thought, I picked the wrong damn woman. A single searing doubt so small it fit in his pocket, yet heavy enough to shift the ground beneath them both and force a reckoning neither saw coming. If this opening's got you hooked, tap that like and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Gideon Vesper regretted his choice of bride, until the great blizzard of 1885 turned everything upside down. The storm struck without warning. The train didn't even have time to whistle. One heartbeat, the rails stretched dark and solid across the frozen plain. The next, everything vanished in a howling wall of white, as though the wild frontier had opened its jaws and decided to devour them all. Inside the trembling little depot, snow still crusting the shoulders of his coat, Gideon stood frozen with one relentless thought he couldn't shake. I picked the wrong woman. If the first bite of that bitter cold has already hooked you, stick around. Because what starts in bitter regret is about to be remade by flickering firelight, raw survival, and a storm that strips every soul bare. The station house was tiny. Painfully tiny. The plank walls groaned and flexed as the wind hammered them sideways, each blast sounding determined to smash its way inside. Snow scraped and hissed against the glass, sealing every crack, blotting out the world one slow inch at a time. Gideon planted himself near the door, tall, stiff, gloved hands opening and closing at his sides. He kept his coat buttoned tight, gloves on, as though readiness alone could somehow unmake the decision already carved into his life. Across the narrow room, on a bench polished smooth by generations of weary travelers, Eulalie Thorne sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers locked so tight the knuckles showed white. Her dress was neat but threadbare, patched with care at the elbows. Her boots bore the scars of miles walked because no other choice existed. Once, just once, she lifted her gaze to him, then dropped it again, as though she already knew exactly what she would see. Gideon swallowed hard. He had pictured this moment so differently. He had expected certainty, a quiet rightness blooming in his chest the instant their eyes met. Instead, a heavy, wrong feeling lodged under his ribs like a stone he couldn't spit out. The marriage had been arranged for plain, practical reasons. His ranch needed a woman, someone to cook, scrub, bring order to a hard-scrabble life carved out of endless winters. No one had promised love. Even so, this wasn't the picture he'd carried in his head. The depot door flew open with a crack that rattled the stove. Silas Quaid staggered through, beard rimed with ice, breath exploding in sharp white clouds. "That's it," he growled. "Tracks are buried. Roads, too. No trains tonight, maybe not tomorrow. You'd be lucky to take 10 steps before the wind buries you." The door slammed shut. The gale outside shrieked in protest. In an instant, the world shrank to 4 walls, 2 strangers tied by a piece of paper, and nature's cold fist closing around them. Eulalie pulled her shawl tighter across her shoulders. It barely helped. She made no complaint, asked nothing. She simply endured. Minutes stretched. Maybe hours. I can help," she said at last, voice quiet but steady. "If there's anything needs doing." Irritation flared in Gideon, not at her, at himself, at how her small, earnest offer laid him open. "Ain't nothing to do," he answered curtly. Then he saw her flinch and let out a long breath. "We wait." She nodded at once. No argument, no resentment, as though waiting was a skill she'd honed since childhood. The stove gave off a feeble orange glow. Gideon fed it another stick, movement sure and practiced. Cold didn't frighten him. He'd outlasted meaner winters than this one. What unsettled him was the way Eulalie watched the flames, not bored, but with fierce, careful attention, as though warmth were a fragile gift that might vanish if she blinked. Hours crawled by. Hunger gnawed. Silas shared the last scraps of food he had, then disappeared into the back room. Soon it was only the two of them again, the storm roaring outside like it wanted an answer. Eulalie rose slowly. "I could make something warm," she offered. "If you'd care for it." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. She moved quietly, handling every crumb like it counted. Her hands shook, not from clumsiness, only nerves. When she passed him the bowl, she kept her eyes down. Gideon took it. The food was simple, but it was hot. Something cracked open inside him. Small, almost silent, like thin ice giving under a careful step. "You grow up out here on the frontier?" he asked, surprising himself as much as her. She nodded. "My folks never had much. I learned how to make do." The word hung between them. Sleep came in jagged pieces. Every time the wind slammed the walls, she jerked awake, clutching her shawl like it might slip away in the dark. Eulalie's fingers gripped her shawl like it was the last thread holding her together. If she let go, it might vanish into the dark. Gideon noticed. From his spot by the stove, he watched how she trembled even with the flames roaring high, how she held herself ramrod straight through bone-deep weariness, as though letting her guard down might earn her nothing but scorn. "You ought to sleep closer to the fire," he said at last, voice low. She snapped her head up fast. I don't want to crowd your spot." "It's warm," he answered simply. "You need the heat more." She moved carefully, settling near the stove without brushing against him, like a wild creature stepping onto unfamiliar ground for the first time. Past midnight, the storm turned vicious again. Silas Quaid burst back in, eyes wide with alarm. "Snow's piling against the doors now. If it don't let up, we'll have to ration the wood. Could be stuck till dawn, maybe longer." Her hands knotted tight in her lap. "I don't handle being unwanted very well," she whispered. The words landed like a fist to the chest, sharper than any shout. Gideon turned to face her fully. "I never said you were unwanted." "You didn't have to." Silence thickened between them like smoke. "I made up my mind with my head," he said after a long beat. "Not my heart. That don't make you the wrong choice." She looked up, stunned. "It makes me the mistake." A savage gust slammed the window. Glass rattled hard. She gasped, hand flying up on instinct, then froze there, ashamed of showing fear. Without a second thought, Gideon closed the distance and draped his heavy coat over her shoulders. Slow. Gentle. "You're safe," he told her. "Long as I'm standing here." Her breath caught sharp. "Thank you." They sat nearer now, not quite touching, but sharing warmth by quiet choice instead of chance. Outside, the blizzard howled on without mercy. And somewhere deep in that endless black night, Gideon felt a truth that scared him worse than the cold. He no longer minded being trapped. The only regret left was how close he'd come to missing her entirely. If this tale's already got its hooks in you, hang tight. Stories worth a damn don't hand you love on a platter. They make it fight to earn its place. Morning didn't break with sunshine. It broke with silence. The heavy, unnatural kind that follows a night of endless screaming, like the whole world had finally exhaled and gone still. Gideon woke too early, muscles locked stiff, every sense braced for the next wall-shaking blast. Nothing came. The storm had spent itself. Weak gray light seeped through windows clogged with drifts, showing the wreckage in full. Snow stood shoulder-high against the walls. The door was entombed from the outside, sealed tight as a grave, like the little Dapo had been swallowed whole. And against his shoulder, breathing soft and even for the first time since they'd arrived, Eulalie slept on. Gideon went still. Sometime in the dark hours, exhaustion had finally won. She'd tipped sideways, head resting feather-light against the wall. Her breathing stayed shallow, steady. One hand stayed curled in the wool of his coat, as though even in dreams she feared the warmth might slip away. He didn't stir. Not when his arm went pins and needles numb. Not when the fire burned low. Not even when the chill started creeping back in. Because for the first time since he'd laid eyes on her, she looked at peace. When she finally stirred, she bolted upright, cheeks flaming. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't do a thing wrong, he said quick and firm. She paused, searching his face like she expected a trap. Then her shoulders eased. Just a fraction. Relief, soft but real. Silas shuffled out of the back room, scrubbing sleep from his eyes. Storm's done its worst, he grunted. But don't get your hopes up too high. Roads are gone. Tracks, too. Could be another day, maybe two. Another day. Yesterday, those words would have sunk like lead in Gideon's gut. Now they felt like borrowed time, precious, fragile, dangerous time. They portioned out the last scraps of food. Gideon slid more onto her tin plate without a word. She caught it anyway. You'll need your strength, she said quietly, pushing it back. So will you, he answered, then tacked on, awkward. And I'm the bigger one. The tiniest twitch pulled at the corner of her mouth before she could hide it. The first ghost of a smile he'd seen from her. To fight the cold, they got to work. Snow had wormed through every crack in the walls overnight. Gideon scooped it out by the handful, breath clouding white in the air. Eulalie dug out a ragged blanket from a forgotten drawer and started stitching the tears, needle flashing quick and sure in her practiced hands. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Survival cuts talk down to what matters most. Without saying a word, their rhythms started to match. He cleared space. She sealed the drafts. He stacked what wood was left. Eulalie stitched the torn blanket with steady, practiced stitches. They moved like partners long before either one had the nerve to call it that. By midday, the wind came creeping back. Not the full-blown rage from before, but plenty enough to growl a warning. This storm wasn't done with them yet. The depot shuddered again. A sharp, splintering crack rang through the room. One of the window panes gave way. Cold rushed in like a living thing, sharp, hungry, clawing at everything it touched. Without a second's pause, Gideon strode across the floor and threw his body against the broken frame to hold back the gale. Eulalie scrambled for loose boards, her shawl slipping off as her hair spilled free in the frantic rush. "Hold it steady," she panted. "I got it. You're bleeding." He flicked a glance down. A thin red line traced across his knuckles. "I'll live." She let out a soft huff. "You frontiermen and your faith in bleeding out slow." Despite everything, a real smile tugged at his mouth. Together they jammed the boards into place, fingers numb and clumsy, breaths fogging close together in the freezing air. When the last draft finally quit whining through the cracks, they stood shoulder to shoulder, chests rising and falling hard, faces pink from cold and hard work. "Thank you," she said, eyes still bright with the rush. "You're faster than you look." "And you're heavier," she shot back without thinking, then froze solid. "I mean, on account of the wind." He laughed. A real, rough laugh that caught them both off guard. They drifted back toward the stove, drawn closer now by plain need. The silence between them had changed. No longer thick and heavy. It felt easy, almost companionable. "I never figured you for the kind sort," she said out of nowhere. He frowned just a touch. "Why's that?" She shrugged, eyes locked on the flames. "Men who marry for convenience usually keep a good arm's length." He turned that over slow. "I've kept folks at arm's length most my life, safer that way. Disappointment cuts deep." She looked at him then, really looked. "You talk like a man who's been let down plenty." "Plenty," he agreed. After a beat, he added quieter. "Mostly by my own self." She nodded, slow and knowing. Not pity, just understanding. The afternoon dragged heavy. Hunger bit harder. Silas came out with bad news. Whole settlements cut off. Folks scattered across the territory just praying for mercy. As daylight bled away, they talked more. Started small. Weather, the lay of the land, sure enough. Then bigger truths started slipping out when neither one was watching the gate. Eulalie told him about her folks, losing her ma too young, growing up hearing she was useful, practical, never pretty, never the one anyone picked. When she finished, she stared at the floorboards, braced for whatever came next. Gideon stayed quiet a long while. Then, soft, "You've shouldered more than most ever will." "That don't make me anything special," she said. "No," he answered. "It makes you tough as rawhide." She swallowed hard. Night dropped again. The cold turned brutal. The stove fought to stay alive. Gideon fed it the very last sticks. They huddled under the patched blanket, shoulders brushing now. No sorry, no fuss. Outside the wind still moaned, but fainter, like it was running out of breath. "I figured I'd wrecked both our lives," he said sudden. She turned toward him. "By marrying me?" "By picking with my head instead of my heart," he corrected, thinking just getting by was enough. And now? He paused. Truth counted here. "Now I reckon getting by's only the start." Her voice came steady. "I never counted on love. Just wanted to feel safe. Respected. You deserve a sight more than what you've settled for." The word hung there, surprising them both. Later, when sleep finally took them, it came gentle. No fear riding shotgun. They lay back to back, sharing warmth on purpose this time. Gideon stared into the blackness, listening to the storm wind down, and felt a plain, hard truth settle in his bones. Regret was cheap. It asked nothing of a man. Caring took doing. By morning, the blizzard finally let go its grip. When the doors at last swung open, Gideon knew one thing clear. He'd never look at Eulalie as some necessary burden again. She was a choice. His choice. Morning came quiet. No wind, no roar, no fight left in the air. Just a deep hush, like the whole prairie had finally caught its breath after days of battle. Gideon woke slow, thrown off by the stillness. For too long now, every sound had spelled trouble. Every gust meant cold. Every creak meant danger. But now, nothing. Only the soft pop of dying coals and the gentle rise and fall of breathing close by. He turned his head. Eulalie was already awake. She sat near the stove, shawl wrapped snug around her shoulders, hair braided loose over one side like she'd done it half in her sleep. Firelight brushed her face in warm gold, easing the sharp lines hunger and fear had carved there. The firelight washed her face in a gentle amber glow, softening the harsh lines that hunger and terror had etched there the night before. She looked calm. Not exactly hopeful. not waiting for anything, just fully there, in the moment. "The storm's finally quit," Gideon said quietly, surprised at how loud his own voice sounded in the hush. She nodded. "I noticed." They traded a small, wordless smile, the kind that needed no explaining. Silas stepped out from the back soon after, already shrugging into his coat. "Road crews are digging through. Won't be fast, but you'll be out of here today. Midday if the weather cooperates." Gideon felt the words settle heavy between them. Out. Not survive, not stuck. This was different. Freedom instead of endurance. They packed without hurry. No one rushed. With the pressure gone, every motion carried extra weight. The blanket she'd patched was folded slow and careful, her fingers lingering on the stitches like they held stories now. Gideon shrugged on his coat, the same heavy wool she'd slept under, and paused a long second before fastening the buttons. Outside, the world looked strange and new. Snow rolled out forever, flawless and untouched, sunlight sparking off the drifts like broken glass. The tracks had vanished. The horizon had been wiped clean. The blizzard hadn't just blown through. It had redrawn the whole damn landscape. Eulalie stepped out beside him, her breath caught soft. "It's beautiful." "Dangerous," he answered from old habit. She glanced sideways at him. "Both can be true at once." That stopped him cold for a beat. The wagon rolled up near midday, 2 weary horses pulling, the driver wrapped thick against the bite. Gideon gave her a hand up first, tucking the blanket snug around her shoulders without a second thought. She felt it. Didn't pull away. The ride to the ranch stretched long and mostly silent. The land carried fresh scars, fences snapped and half-buried, fence posts lost under white, trails erased. But it was country he knew bone deep. Solid. Home. He caught himself watching her more than the passing miles. She sat straight, hands resting easy in her lap now, eyes steady as the prairie rolled by. She looked changed. Not tougher, she'd always been tough, but surer of herself, like the storm had handed her proof of something she'd never been allowed to claim before. When the ranch house finally rose against the white expanse, she went still. It stood there like an old promise kept through hard years, smoke drifting lazy from the chimney, proof that life and warmth went on. "Here it is," he said. She nodded, swallowing. "Bigger than I pictured." "So was the storm," he answered gentle. Inside, the place was cold but whole. Gideon set to work building a fire, while Eulalie hung in the doorway, uncertain now that survival's rules no longer wiped away what came next. This wasn't the depot anymore. This was a home. His home. And maybe, if she chose, hers too. When the flames finally caught, and heat began to steal back into the room, Gideon turned to face her square for the first time since they'd arrived. No walls up, no defenses. "I owe you more than just sorry," he said. She waited. Quiet. No bracing for the worst. "I hauled you into this thinking only about what I was short on. The storm showed me plain what I damn near threw away." Her eyes searched his, cautious but open. "I don't need fancy promises," she said soft. "I've made do with a whole lot less." "I know," he answered. "That's exactly why I won't hand you hollow ones." She drew a slow breath. The hardest part came next. "You can go," he said, the words hanging thick and deliberate. "Soon as the roads are clear all the way, I'll see you get wherever you want. Or, you can stay. Not because I needed somebody, but because I'm choosing you now." Tears rose in her eyes. Not fear this time. Relief. "I was scared," she admitted, voice trembling just a little, "that once the storm quit, all the good parts would quit too." He shook his head. The storm didn't make what happened between us. It just peeled back the cover and let us see it. She took a step closer, then another, braver. If I stay, she said, I won't keep my mouth shut. I won't make myself smaller to fit whatever you thought you wanted. One corner of his mouth lifted. I don't want quiet. I want real. And I don't want you smaller. I want you right here. She nodded slow, the choice sinking deep into her like roots finding soil. Then I'll stay. The days after weren't perfect. The days that followed weren't flawless. There were clumsy stretches. Who claimed which side of the bed, whose turn it was to fix supper. Quiet spells that begged for time more than talk. Gideon discovered Eulalie hummed softly to herself while she worked, little tunes drifting through the house like forgotten songs. She learned he'd skip eating altogether when a job had him locked in tight. One evening she scorched the cornbread black. He forked it down anyway without a word. Is it awful? She asked, eyes fixed on him, waiting. He chewed slow, considering. I've choked down worse. She arched a brow. That ain't what I asked. His mouth curved. Then yeah, it's pretty bad. But I'll make it through, he added. She laughed then, a true, unguarded laugh. Soft, startled, like she hadn't known the sound was still inside her. Winter gave ground grudgingly, inch by stubborn inch. Snow thawed into muddy patches. Fences got mended post by post. Days turned into habits. Habits turned into something shared, something steady. One evening they stood together on the porch, watching the sun slide low over fields that had once been lost under white drifts. She spoke quiet, almost afraid to break the hush. Do you still wish you'd picked different? He didn't pause, didn't flinch. No. I only wish I'd seen you clear from the start. She smiled then, full, open, no holding back. The blizzard of 1885 stopped being just a fight to stay alive. It became the fork in the trail where two paths that had almost missed each other turned and met head-on. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment. And thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.